Well, thank you, everyone. I think we can start. We already have a lot of people in the Zoom. And I keep saying every time we have such a session, whether I'm listening in or participating, that this is one of the good innovations through COVID, that we can really share information so much more easily. And the fact that it gets naturally recorded, people can go back and listen to it. So today I am really privileged to bring a partner, Fusion, and their partners to join the open access discussion that we've launched with CAHF. And we're really going to drill into the journey of Fusion to build dignified rental sustainable housing. So when FSD, and to introduce myself for those who may not know me, I'm Sita Shah, the Senior Affordable Housing Finance Specialist at FSD Kenya. And when we received money from the British in 2020 to promote affordable housing, we recognize that urban rental is a very, very important asset class. And that is really shown in the statistics. So 80% of urban Kenyans across different cities in Kenya rent, and 90% in Nairobi rent. Yet somehow housing programs are very focused on home ownership when they should be a ladder to improved housing outcomes. And so one area that we've studied a lot in Nairobi is the Pipeline neighborhood that provides very accessible housing in terms of location to jobs. And while there's room for improvement in the quality of housing there, it shows the need for accessible, affordable rental housing. And so without saying more, I'd just like to introduce the panelists. First up will be James McLean, who's the Director of Real Estate at Fusion. Fusion is an investment management firm, and they have a real estate arm that have developed and managed the flagship mall in Kigali, Rwanda, and now a mall in Meru, Kenya, but have always been interested in affordable rental as an asset class. With James, we have Antje Eckholt, the director with FBW, an architectural and engineering firm with a strong focus on sustainability, with offices in Nairobi, Kampala, Kigali, and in London, where they were founded. And FBW were leading the design work for Fusion's project. And last but not least, we have Beatrice Mwangi, the research manager at Center for Affordable Housing Finance, who, as I mentioned, are championing the Open Access Initiative with other partners. We're so grateful to Fusion and FBW for contributing their knowledge to this initiative. And as I hand it over to James, I'd just like to request all the participants that we have two different buttons. One is a chat box. We would welcome everyone to put their names in and who they work for, etc. So we get to know who's participating and we can, just know who the community is. And separately to the left, there's a Q&A box. And request you to put questions in the Q&A box so we can better monitor which questions are answered, answer any just virtually, etc. So I'll just hand it over to James, please.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sita. So I won't go through the agenda, but we'll try and keep it nice and short. We know with these events, it's good to get to the questions as quick as possible because that's sometimes the most interesting bit. But I am going to introduce the concepts of Ubuntu Homes myself, and I'll pass over to FBW to talk about the designs and the USPs that we came up with. I'll then talk about one of the most interesting bits, which is the issues that we as the developer faced. Then we'll do a Q&A session. So we've broken it into two. And then Beatrice will discuss the tenant survey and the findings, which is a very useful exercise that went on some of our buildings. And then, of course, a second question and answers there, which myself and Beatrice will try and answer as well as we can. So great. I'm assuming I can be heard well and everything. So I'm just going to jump straight in. So we'll keep coming back to this image, but really I'm going to talk us first through the Ubuntu Homes business plan and what we were aiming to do. So firstly, I'm going to I think it's good just to tell you a little bit more about Fusion. So what Ubuntu Homes is Ubuntu Homes is the Fusion strategy for low-income housing. So it's how we looked at the problem and how we tried to solve it as a developer. Why do we think we're well placed for that? Well, Fusion is a mid-cap private equity firm, and also has an in-house development team. So we've been investing in East Africa since 2006. We have a track record in delivering, as Sita mentioned, we've delivered everything from kind of middle-income housing through large-scale commercial, all the way up to malls. So as Sita mentioned, some of our flagship projects are, we have a couple of skyscrapers in Upper Hill that we've developed. We have we just finished a mall in Meru, which we'd love you to all go and see next time you drive through. And we've recently built and exited a large development in Kigali, which really was like the village market of Kigali, which we sold last year to a local purchaser. So we have a good track record in both development, structuring, and exiting. So what about our low-income housing strategy? So we were always a bit negative on the market, on the low-income housing market, because we found that the offtake market was very difficult to navigate and quite small. So it was actually during a webinar like this that our chairman was hosting with 3 of the DFIs, where he very much challenged them to prove that if we, as a developer, started bringing units onto the market, that without a mature mortgage market and a wealthy set of off-takers, how will we sell them to the actual end users as opposed to investors? And they turned that round to us and said, well, low-income housing is obviously an issue, so how would you approach it? So what we decided was, yes, it would be great if everyone could own a house, because it's a way to create financial stability, and it's a way to narrow the inequality gap. But from our research, what we came to understand is that actually a lot of people would just prefer a better house, a better rental property. As Sita said, 90% of people in Nairobi at this level rent, and we wanted to see if we could provide a better rental property to those people. So our priorities were location, making it safe, and having it genuinely affordable. So when we looked at the market, we realized that 50% of salaried people in Kenya were earning less than 30,000 shillings per month. So we thought if we really wanted to target low income, we had to be able to deliver a product at the lowest level for less than 10,000 shillings. And that was our target when we started the design process. The other key things, as it says on this slide, the other things we really cared about were IFC life and fire safety. Just to quickly dive into that, we will talk about it more later. But I reckon I looked at 50 buildings in the areas we wanted to build, and not one of them had a secondary staircase or even a way of, an emergency fire ladder. So, and definitely none of them had high pressure water hoses. So one of the things we wanted to do was see if we could deliver these units at below 10,000 shillings rental per month, while also ticking off the IFC life and fire safety standards. We then, in consultation with our architects, added EDGE certification, because they had some really clever ways of achieving that without throwing money at the problem, which is what we didn't want to do, because the more money you spend on solar, the more you pass on to the tenant at the end. And finally, we wanted them to really be located where people wanted to live. So I'm going to talk about this more in a bit, but that was the strategy we came up with: rentals, safe, a sense of community, and a really good location. So the first point there is built on a single block and on an infill site. And this was the hardest thing we threw to our architects to fix for us. So I think I'll talk about it a bit more. So what do we mean by infill sites? So we started doing research into where people wanted to live. we probably looked at more than, I'd say, 30 low-income housing opportunities as an investment committee before we actually chose to do it ourselves. And all the good ones, the really well-designed ones with great economies of scale, were just situated miles from where people wanted to live, and they were planning bus services or ways of getting people to commute easily. And kind of our investment committee threw to us the challenge of, where do people really want to live? And unfortunately, the answer to that was, people really want to live exactly where they live. So we just picked the highest density, low-income parts of the market that we were working in. So in this case, Nairobi, and excluding informal settlements. So we ended up with a list of places we would decide to build, and we had decided to do our pilot in Githurai 45. We really, because of that, once we picked where we wanted to build, we went to see if we could find sites. And as I'm sure you all know, there are no 1 acre sites in Githurai 44. There aren't even any half-acre sites in Githurai 44. So that's when we came up with this idea that if we designed a model block, and that block, I always think of it as like a piece of Lego, and that piece of Lego can be put anywhere. So you can put it on 1/8 of an acre in Githurai, you can put it on maybe 1/4 of an acre in Zimmerman or whatever. So we can move it around. So that was the vision for this, for Ubuntu, was that instead of having one large project and having to build all the services in, we would try and deliver them in infill sites in high density areas. So just to try and give that, you an idea of that based on with pictures, I've tried to with the next slide. This is the same image as the slide before, but what you can see is our vision was that instead of having 10 Ubuntus here and 10 Ubuntus here, they would be everywhere. They would be dotted around, and you could build one Ubuntu block on 1/8 of an acre, so the ones in the middle, or you could build 2 Ubuntu blocks on 1/4 of an acre. So if you look at the ones on the right-hand side or the top right, and then the idea being that if we did get a large site from the government of maybe 1 acre or half an acre, you just add blocks per acre. So you'd build 4.5 and 8 on 1 acre. Now that obviously meant that the first project we had to do was an 1/8. Or we had to design fully was an 1/8. To learn the market, we did Fusion did 3 small projects with its own money. One in Githurai, one in Nakuru, and one in Kasarani. And that was really just to learn the market and understand how to do it, because it's not an easy feat. And then we engaged our architect, and we threw them probably quite a difficult brief. And that brief was exactly as I've said. We want to be able to build on infill sites as small as 1/8. We still want to retain a green interior space. We wanted to have one point of entrance and exit for security. That was one thing we learned from doing our pilots. We wanted to hit the IFC life and fire safety standards without crippling cost. We wanted to be edge, and we wanted basically to build a community and build a great place to live. Obviously not an easy feat, but we ended up partnering with FBW, who very much picked this up and kind of ran with it on our behalf. So I'll actually now pass over to Anjay from FBW, who can talk you through the wizardry behind how we were going to deliver this project.
Yes, hello. Thank you, James. Okay, maybe just go to the next slide straight away. So obviously, this design was, as James has pointed out, had several challenges, but I just wanted to point out maybe how we started off with this when we also listened to the webinar in the series last month, that there was some similarity. So we're looking forward to the discussions at the end. So similarity also, we're looking at ground plus 4 models, similar, we are looking at infill sites, and we're looking at the rental model. So all of this, which is a bit of a departure from the standard. And as James has pointed out, what this is supposed to be, it is supposed to be a product, an improved product of things which are already happening in those areas. So we already find similar unit sizes, we already find similar densities in those areas. We obviously find also this, which is part of the brief, that it's a mixed-use building. So all these elements are there, but we just try to create clever modules and to look at then how the same modules can then be adapted to other sites. And yeah, looking at what the smallest module is what you can see there now. So you have the studio basically, which you can see where we have here in the right-hand side, the top. We have two studios which offer a sort of the wet room area in a separate grid. So between two units, we have a narrower grid where we have the washrooms. This allows a certain flexibility that in the sizing then you can have, as you can see on the right hand below in the pink, that we have a 2-bedroom unit, which fits exactly over the two studios, which are on top of each other. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Yeah. Oh, that's James' cursor.
My cursor.
Okay, sorry. Right. Yeah, so then taking the same sort of studio module, as you can see on the left-hand side, we have 3 studios which can then fit with 2 1-bedroom units. So what this allows, when you have an interesting client, as we've just explained, who has many, many requirements, as we start with the design and the mix has not yet been fixed. So we know what our building size is, we know the density we can afford, and then we can still, as the design continues, we can still change the mix because we swap, the 2 studios for the 1 2-bedroom, or we swap, like we show here, the blue for the green, to 1-bedroom. So that was our starting point. And yeah, just take note of these 2 grid lines. You will see them in the next slide. So when, these problems of having a tight site have been a problem in many sort of city expansions and densifications over the centuries. So what you can see at the bottom is that there's the access road. So the access road, only a narrow part of the plot has this access road. It's not this, on this plot, we only have the short end with the access road, and that means that the light you can get on the access road by orientating the units to that side is very limited. So we actually end up having to put a block at the back, which is our secondary sort of back block, and then we have to, I think we'll get through it when we look at the edge compliance, that we want to create units which are not very deep. So we don't want to put units back to back, which does not allow for cross ventilation. So by having a single aspect corridor, the building is obviously not very efficient, and we need to have space for the 2 staircases. But yeah, the actual light and ventilation is vastly improved. So that's why I came up with this one configuration. This configuration has about 38 or 38 units. So it's not yet hitting the 45 as per the requirement. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm just need to change the slide. I've got a problem with my computer. Give me one moment.
Sorry, we're sitting next to each other.
Yeah,
Not
sorry,
on the same
everyone.
computer. Maybe just to continue, the other challenge we had was this conversion between square meters and feet. So when people are talking about a 1/4 acre plot, we would have thought that this was 500 square meters. But what they actually sell you is a plot which is 50 by 100 feet. And that, when you then put that into square meters, it is 465 square meters. So even there, we were losing out on a few vital square meters to able to put our 45 units in. But just go to the next slide. Yeah, so on this configuration, again, the road is at the bottom. So when we actually would have, as you can see on the one on the left, when we would actually have 2 plots side by side, we create a very nice courtyard, you know, have a nice feeling. And we can also have economies of scale when we can join certain facilities. The other option we looked at back to back. So basically these roads, they have a certain grid that after, you know, after the second plot, the next road is there. So if you could get 2 plots back to back, again, economies of scale, you probably can get away with 3 staircases. So you basically have 1 staircase less. Next. Okay, so then to actually fit in the 45 units, we ended up with something like this. So you have, again, at the bottom of the slide, you see the main road, and then the other sort of units at the back are parallel to that. This configuration also helps if you actually have a sloping site. So let's say you have a site which happens quite often out of Nairobi, you know, your site slopes away from the road, and then you would basically be able to build these buildings going down in line with the contours. This configuration offers 45 units, you know, for those of you who are interested in this urban planning figures, a ground coverage of 70% and a plot ratio of 3.4. This is mostly achieved by having mainly studios. And just for definition, a studio is a large space with its own washroom, and it has a sort of kitchen area at the front. So where it's a bit different from a bedsitter, which we've also seen in some of these presentations where, you know, you have shared facilities. That of course is way more efficient, but I think the market research showed that there was most requirements for these studios. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the previous configuration, showing it in an urban context, similar again, you know, we would love to see 2 plots side by side because it creates a nice courtyard. Back to back we would also take, and then, yeah, our worst would be just to have a single site, but fairly efficient. That's the point of view. Now jumping to the actual site which Fusion purchased. This was actually a corner plot, so that's why this configuration looks a bit different. So you have, where you can see the longer block is the main road, and then there's a small sort of side access road along one of the short sides. This allows us obviously more frontage, you know, also works really well at ground floor, that we can have all these units, which are here marked as 1 to 7. So we can actually have all these as shop units at the ground floor. Then we have a single access as well through the rear, which we're not showing on the slide now. And we managed to squeeze in these 2 light wells next to the staircases with some trees, see on the right-hand side. And just to point out these walls in red, so where we would differ in our model, again, fire and life safety compliance, we would put the aspects of the buildings onto the road, so, or onto the courtyards we create. So all the units either look out onto a road space or onto a courtyard we create, so that units are not looking out onto someone else's land. This is what has happened a long time. People have built these units with balconies facing onto basically an adjacent plot boundary, and that causes a lot of fire life safety issues, because of course the next one comes and you can actually shake hands to the next unit, which would mean that through the window you would have flame spread. So where we have these lines in red, these are closed walls, and they are there for fire protection. And when you see, you know, a lot of big cities who have grown with these dense blocks, they have always had these blank walls. You know, sometimes when you see an empty plot, you see these blank walls, but when everything is built up, you don't see them anymore. Okay, next slide. Just a bit of a zoom in. So we actually took this to full detail design, tender, everything. We're ready to build, and I'm sure we'll still find an opportunity. So you can see now in green the studio apartment, you know, it's a little bit like a hotel room in that you sort of enter, you've got your washroom to one side, and where in a hotel room you might have the cupboard, you have the kitchen. Also, I think a lot of student residences are like that. So it's about maximizing the space and giving people flexibility, what they can use with the remaining space by not determining it too much. And then the other aspect is that, you know, obviously we would like to give natural ventilation. So when you have a small space, if you actually have a full height window, you know, suddenly it feels so much bigger because you have a relationship to the outside. So we managed to squeeze in this very, very small balcony and another sort of fairly tall window at the end. So that gives you that feeling of space. Then the one bed, there's obviously different configurations because we have this offset for the extra bedroom. And then, you know, the central space, which is the living and dining and kitchen space, is similar to the studio. So you just have your added bedroom on the side. What is also interesting here on this one to see this rise in the service duct. So on the right-hand side, we have the access corridor. And from there, we would then have this recess where all our MEP fittings are running, you know, where our water fittings are running, where also we've got rainwater downpipes and the like. So that allows for access when people are not at home. So these rises can be accessible from the corridor by the maintenance staff. Good. And added as well, loads of discussion on how to add the kitchen gas, but yeah. We've also managed to squeeze that in with an external access. Okay, next.
And I might just jump in there and say, like, for us, the important thing was we were looking at scale. Now, obviously, we didn't achieve it, or you'd be seeing Ubuntu's everywhere, but we wanted to be building 50 of these. So we knew we couldn't design a single block, and, you know, well, we didn't know. We were told by our very clever architects, you couldn't just design a single block, but they could get us 90% of the way there, because using this kind of modular design means that we know exactly the countertop sizes in every single unit, even if the units are going to change. We know exactly where what kind of washroom fittings there will be. All the doors were completely standard, and that was our plan, was to create the economies of scale, not by site, but by type. So we could create the economies of scale over the whole portfolio. And then we went as far in this design process as trying to figure out how to use as little piping as possible. So as Anjay said, they came up with this grid system. So all services run from, I think it's a meter width or something. So that we went to the point where we tried to figure out how we can use as little piping as possible. Because for us, we wanted to deliver a quality product, but we had to deliver it at a low enough cost so that we could charge the rent that we were aiming for and our investors wanted. So it was what originally the model block, the idea was that we would just have one design and we'd build it over and over again. But what we ended up was quite clever was we had one design where the shape could move around. And that's kind of where we think the secret sauce was with this product. So we could, once we had the funding, we could have ordered all the doors for 50 blocks on day one, because they would have fit every block, no matter how, whether we had all bed sitters, whether we had all 2 beds, etc. So that was very important, good, and one of the big solutions that we thought we got out of this process. I'll pass back on to the next slide.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so the edge compliance, try to visualize it a little bit. So what you can see here on the slide is, you know, the cross ventilation, which is possible, as I explained, because we've got the unit and then just an open corridor, which sort of, you know, again, works a little bit as a balcony as well. Then, you know, ventilation also through the staircase, where we have a staircase in this particular case, and then a tree. Then, I don't know how familiar you are with Edge. So the basic form is to achieve 20% saving in energy usage, 20% saving in water usage, and 20% saving in embodied energy. Of course, there's an advanced version where you're actually achieving more energy savings. So how did we achieve this? With the brief, as I said, you know, no extra cost. So the large opening really helped on the natural ventilation. So it's always a balance between how deep you make the units versus the size of the openings. And having these tall, narrow openings helps a lot with the ventilation. And in this case, we have the cross ventilation, so we can ventilate out through the kitchens. So cross ventilation is one. We have solar hot water on the top floor. As I said, a lot of discussions and MEP provisions. So if you do have hot water, solar hot water from the roof, which serves all the floors, then you need to reticulate this water, which is an expensive measure. So we opted for the top floor. Then lighting controls. That was on the energy. Then water, basically just efficient fittings. So it's getting actually, compared to now, this is a few years ago, much more available in the market, these low flow fittings that you can manage this quite easily. Then the saving in embodied energy, not to be too technical, so reduced slab thickness, which is a structural measure, and then also reducing the finishes. So we always think that, paint looks really great on day one, but it causes a lot of maintenance issues. And, also when you have a rental model, you need to always think that, that maintenance cost is going to be on that, in this case, developer running the property. So we thought if we actually go with the model, which you see there quite often, where we expose the stone, but sort of look at it as a design feature, then we're reducing the finish and the need for painting on the external facade, which would then mean scaffolding and the like. Then on the internal finishes, like in the common areas, we've just got a screed finish, so that we don't have to have a tile, which then the edge actually calculates. If you have a tile, it's an imported product, so it has no embodied energy. So it cuts basically two birds with one stone, that you will have, you will have reduced cost, and you will have you will have the edge benefits as well. So that's just an overview of the edge savings. This is just to give you a bit of an idea what the detailed design then looked like, and the height, it looks very straightforward, I would say. Next slide. And yeah, going back to our image, try to show a little bit more what it means also in terms of urban design. So there's always the two sides, having a single use, but I think we really welcomed that it was mixed use project, because we think that it really activates the front on the roadside when you have these shop or commercial units. It can be a workshop. It gives people a business income, and it also upgrades these areas as to being just towns where people just commute, and they're sort of dead during the day. So if this would actually happen on this corner plot, we think this area would really be upgraded. And then what you see on the left on the top was also our ideas how we could, how the community could use the rooftop, which we managed to retain. So by having this narrow grid I explained, that is also where we're then stacking all our water tanks. And then so the open spaces, which are over the apartments itself, are open spaces. You can start growing your vegetables. Of course, it was just at the end of COVID when we did this project, people really thinking of how can people feed themselves. Obvious use is to dry your clothes. It's an open space where kids could play. I know we need to be supervised, but I think it's giving something back, because these areas are really, really built up and they have no open green spaces. So by creating these roof spaces, we can give something back to the community. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. I think I'll take back over. We are about to have a stop for questions once I've talked us through the embarrassing bit, the issues that we've faced.
Hi, James, if I may.
If I may request, if you could just speak through for 2 minutes your vision for those who joined a bit late, and then talk to the issues you faced, it will really help to make sense for everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, great. I'll do that. So just a quick recap on the vision. The vision was we wanted to try and improve and revolutionize the low-income rental market, because we think that's, yes, everyone wants to own a home, but at the moment, a lot of the people in the informal sector who don't have mortgages, it's a process they have to work towards through something else that Fusion works on, which is incremental building and plot sales. But for now, people want to be in good community areas, living in better quality, safe apartments. So that's what we tried to do. We tried to come up with a block that we could build on any eighth of an acre anywhere in the world. So we could build it, as I said before, we did 3 pilots. So even though the pilots weren't the model block, they weren't this fantastic FBW design, they were all in high density areas and truly low income. So, you know, we made sure that some apartments, I think our lowest cost apartment we have is a block in Githurai where some of our bed sitters are going for 6,500 to 7,000 shillings per month. So we really managed to tick the 30% of the below 30,000 shilling income target, which is what we're aiming for. So I'm going to now talk about kind of where we got to, but that's just a quick background on kind of our vision and what we were trying to achieve through Ubuntu Homes. Ubuntu Homes being the Fusion low-income housing offering. Now, quickly, I will just I'll comment at a high level. So we had learned the market through these 3 pilots, which we did. As I said, one in Nakuru, one in Kasarani, and one in Githurai. Each one was a different type. One was a repositioning, one was an outright purchase, and one was a construction. And we did that to really understand the bits that our investment committee pointed out we did not understand. And that is, can you build in such high density areas? How will you manage them? And how do you create a sense of community with what ends up being quite a transient group of people living in your buildings? And how do you make them safe? So those are the things we tried to tick off with our pilots. And then we're going to talk about kind of the next stage. That was stage 1. We achieved stage 1. Then we moved on to stage 2, which was designing the model block and then rolling out. And I'll talk about why we haven't been able to achieve that yet and why it was put on hold as a strategy as we go through the problems faced. So issues we faced, and this is us, you know, kind of bearing all and say, you know, explaining kind of the struggles we had. Fusion rates itself. We are a local developer. We understand how to navigate the local market, but we were going into a space that no one had tried to formalize in an area where very few large-scale international developers have developed. So we faced issues as anyone would. And I'm going to just take us through a few of them. So the first one was building approvals. Now, I know the saying is assumption is the lowest form of human knowledge, but I must say that here we made a big assumption that I don't look back on with regret, but definitely frustration. So because, as you can see from this image, this is the exact plot we were going to build the first model block on. As you can see, every single building around us is built corner to corner, even ones that go up to 6 or 7 stories. And I think the point that we had assumed in our design process pre-application was that we would also be able to build corner to corner. Now, unfortunately, when it came down to it, we submitted our plans and we were asked to leave road reserves. So I think it was, I can be corrected, but 3 meters on the main road and 2 meters on the secondary road. Now, we don't know why we were asked to do that and everyone else wasn't. People can read into that, but basically it meant that we designed the thing on the left and we could only build on the space on the right. So that made this plot untenable from our point of view, because you know, all of a sudden we would have bought I think it was 45 units down to somewhere in the region of 25 because of the way, you know, having to get 2 staircases in meant that it wasn't possible. Now, we did get concessions after kind of appealing, but we still had to leave a 3-meter road reserve on one edge for this this plot. And again, that meant that we actually could not deliver this plot profitably for our investors. So though we have the plot now, we are still ready to go back and have that discussion. You know, we would need to get that approval before we put any more money into this exact site. So that was issue number one. It was a bit of a shock. We think we know now that what we really need to do is identify the plot and then go and get a no objection letter. And I think we've done that on another plot, but this is just something that we didn't expect to happen on, as Antje said, one that we went all the way down to level 3, stage 3 design on. Fundraising. I'm gonna talk about fundraising as politely as I can, because we ended up kind of fundraising for 2 years. As I said, what we do with Fusion, and what we always do is we normally prove the market with our own money, and then we go out and raise money from investors to scale. So we've done it on land sales. We bought small plots of land ourselves, subdivided them and sold them. And then when we got to the point at which we were confident that we had the mechanism in place to run them efficiently, we went out and raised money. We've done the same with our SME financing. We've done the same with our real estate financing, you know, over the last, say, 15 years. So it's how we do it. So we did the pilots with our own money, and we did have a pool of money ready to do stage 2 internally, so balance sheet money. But then we went to the market to really raise the remaining, and our target investors were DFIs. What we found was we had designed a whole scheme. I think it was a $20 million scheme to do roughly 50 of these blocks. And that scheme was completely thought out and ready to go. And then when we took it to each of the investors, unfortunately, they all wanted something different. And they didn't want something different and all the same that we could tweak it. Each investor wanted something completely different. So we don't like the tail wagging the dog. So we tried to avoid falling down that route. But to give some examples, I think one of the groups we talked to couldn't do less than $50 million and asked us to scale it up. And we obviously said, no, you can't prove a concept with $50 million. You can do it with 20. Other ones would have required us to go beyond edge on kind of green aspects. And we thought edge was fantastic because edge was doable by being clever and smart, not throwing money at the problem. But every other thing we looked at, all the other accreditations, you genuinely have to throw money at it. You have to put in a solar system. You have to put in water cleaning or processing. And we couldn't afford to do that and still deliver at the market we were looking at. So, but the biggest one by far was rental was not the attractive topic for low-income housing at the time. So I'd say 90% of the people we spoke to said they love it, they love the design. Can we redesign it for sale? Can we redesign it for sale and sell at what they used to say was the magic below 5 million mark, which, you know, if you ask me, I think it's a below 2 million mark if you really want to sell. And we said no, because we didn't, our whole premise was that the market to purchase those units was coming online, but it wasn't, but that wasn't where the demand was right now. The demand was for safe, affordable housing in high density areas. So we kind of couldn't do that. Having said that, we did find 2 fantastic DFIs. I won't name and shame, but we did find one that was willing to give us an incredible debt term sheet for half the cash we needed for 10 million. Pretty subsidized. The reason we were at DFIs was to hit our target of renting units at below 10,000 shillings. We couldn't do that with equity return because, you know, if you've got a building that has a 9.5 or 10% yield, there's no way of making a 15 to 16% equity return out of that design because math. But we could do it with subsidized debt, which we were willing to secure from other assets and other things within our portfolio. So we did get a great term sheet for 10 million, which unfortunately we couldn't carry through because the second DFI, which we had secured some very cheap financing from, we got to term sheet stage, we signed term sheets, and then unfortunately the $3.5 million we thought we were getting was reduced to below $500,000. and that didn't give us the scale to hit the economies of scale to build. So we found 2 DFIs that were willing to do it. One of them would do debt only, and that debt had to have something junior. We found some junior financing. Unfortunately, that financing disappeared. So at that point, very frustratingly for us, we had another opportunity that we could go into. It was running parallel to this, and because of the amount of time, I think it took us an hour and a half. Wow, a year and a half to get to term sheet with the large DFI, and 2 years to get to term sheet. Well, we started a year after the first DFI, so a whole 2 years to get to term sheet with the second DFI. In that time, another opportunity came along, and our funds were put there. It's doing well, and those funds are starting to come back out. So the position we're in now is that the pot of Fusion's money, which was set aside to do this, is coming back in from this other project. And we are starting to talk to people again about reinvigorating Ubuntu, because our pilots have done incredibly. So we have been at 100% occupancy in all of our pilots, given natural churn, for the last 3 years. So they continue to perform. This is what Beatrice is going to talk about later, is the feedback we get for our pilots is incredible. Like, we've created community, people want to live there. And I think we've proved that we can actually run these things and manage these things. We just need to raise some more funding so we can do it at scale. The only way to deliver such a good product at scale is to get scale. And that's what we're now working on again. So that was issue number 2. And issue number 3 is property management. So this is something which a lot of people don't think about, but our investors were extremely keen on. And that was because our investors had looked at the market, and they thought that the way low-income housing property management was handled in the region was not good enough for our brand. I won't go into stories, but when I went around and started meeting people and asking them what they would be looking for, at a personal level, they said they don't want people to weld their doors shut when they're late on rent. And we're like, yeah, well, that's totally acceptable. So what we tried to do is we couldn't find a local property manager that would do it to the standard we wanted. And those standards, they're not big standards here. We're talking transparency on tenant rights, real contracting, non-abusive behavior, and safe communities. So those are the 4 things we were trying to achieve, and we couldn't find someone who would be able to do it at that level. So we did end up having to set up Fusion Estates. Little things about Fusion Estates: we had an actual lease. In fact, every single person who's joined our apartment, this is the first lease they'd ever signed. No, maybe by like 5% or something, but most of them, this is true. And then we also just developed things like the tenant handbook, which gave complete transparency on their rights, what they should expect from the landlord, what they can demand from the landlord, what they have to pay for themselves. Because what we found was that ambiguity on rights was being used in order to manipulate tenants. So, we, for example, our onboarding process, we made it transparent from day one, everything we would require from them. We also, which some people said we shouldn't do, we explained that, we can't just turn up. If you don't pay your rent today, we can't just turn up and kick you out of the apartment tomorrow. That's not what happens. People have the right to be given a period of time, and there is a statutory period of time they should be given before you can then go through the process of having someone evicted, which at our level, it's not quite as bad as our commercial buildings. At our level, you meet with the local chief, you see if they can sort it, and if not, you then go down the auction bailiff route. So, it was one of those things that was painful at the start, but I think one of the things you'll see from Beatrice's report is that people love living in our apartments. They're not perfect, but they do have, people stay much longer. And for us, we realized that the natural churn for these apartments is between 9 and 12 months. I think for us, it's slightly longer. It's somewhere between 15 to 18. Basically means that we end up with 1 month a year more income. So it is paying off, even though obviously it leads to some pretty tough conversations. Finally, cost fluctuations. Now, I am, as you can probably tell from the way I'm talking, I'm not the detailed construction guy, and that is done by my colleague Vincent very well. But you know, I do care about costs and numbers. So really one of the things we've noticed is the changing costs, and you know, we can't talk about building now without talking about the changing costs. So really the key thing here is even after value engineering between 2021 and 2025, our build cost increased from 37 million to about 45 million for this initial block. Now we've priced up the initial block that we currently are going back for approvals on and to see what the changes are. But really going into detail, you know, electrical and mechanical and contingency, the reason they are lower is because we value engineered this. We moved from engaging a contractor, which was the initial quoting, to doing labor only contracts and direct sourcing, which we have the in-house team to do. So we thought we could do it without losing too much efficiency. But the builders works is kind of where the big increase in cost has come in, and I've listed a few of them. Well, I think we'll discuss with CETA. We'll probably share this. We'll figure out how we share these numbers after the webinar. But really the big things you can see there are the superstructure and substructures. That increase is purely the increase in the price of concrete and the price of steel. A million reasons why, everyone knows them, but we saw those. Yes, they've been fluctuating a lot, but based on these two sets, that's the major cost on items 1 and 3. Items 4 and 5, was also an increase in basically transportation costs. You know, shipping costs have gone up massively. We were hoping to get some of our finishes in kind of to be imported, even though most of it had been designed away by FBW, but there were still items coming internationally, and those items went up massively in cost. So basically we did what at the time felt like fantastic value engineering. It's all been wiped out by increasing costs in really steel and cement. Yeah, we will run these numbers again as we go, hopefully through the tender process. Once we've done the tender process, we can share much more updated numbers. These are our internal kind of estimates that we've been keeping. We've actually done it every year just to see how prices change. Although if you think about it from an inflation point of view, and you say that our inflation's at 6 or something every year, it's actually not that ridiculous an increase in Kenyan shilling, but it definitely changed the model and changed our fundraising model. That's it. I think the last thing I'll say is, you know, we've got the product ready. We are ready to, and actually we forced Anjay to do a layout for another site that we own in Ruaka. But really we are kind of ready to go still on this. We still have the same team. We'd love to start building. And as I say, the pool of money that Fusion needed to do this is coming back. So, you know, we are starting to have conversations again, and we really hope we can start delivering Ubuntus because we still think it's the answer, and we don't think anyone's doing it well. Yeah, so great. I think that's it. I've spoke too much. Maybe I can hand over to Sita to run the Q&A.
Thank you so much. I've learned more than from our conversations over the years. We'll ask Beatrice to come in actually with the presentation on what we learned from the rental survey. And to touch a little bit on James's point, at some point in our partnership, we tried to test a rent relief fund with Fusion, and just realized it's so hard because you're creating incentives for people not to pay their rent. So it's something that FSD still wants to try to test, but you almost need to know more about your tenants and have a bit longer term tenants, etc., to be able to test that. So that's still very much in our interest. But CAHF supported us to do, together with Real, our other partner, they supported to do a survey on tenants, both at Fusion and another partner, Kwangu Kwako. Both are on CAHF's website. And we thought we could ask Beatrice to just bring some of the learnings from that survey. And I see the Q&A has wonderful questions. So Beatrice will try to summarize the learning. So we have at least a good 15 minutes for questions, please. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sita, and thanks, James and Ant, for the initial part of it. My name is Beatrice Mwangi. I work for the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. It's an independent think tank based in South Africa, but working across Africa. And our mission is to make the housing markets work within the continent. And we do that by providing market intelligence to stakeholders. As Sita mentioned at the very beginning, we championed the Open Access Initiative, which was established by a couple of partners, including FSD Kenya, Real, and FSD Africa. And the main objective of the initiative is to address the information asymmetry within the market. And we do that by harnessing the collective experiences of developers and investors, and just trying to understand the journey they go through in the delivery of affordable housing. The initiative focuses on 5 pillars. There's the product, where we're looking at what has been delivered or what is being delivered. We look at the process, that's the time, the steps, and the costs. We look at the people, who are the target market, how is the affordability, what are the existing housing needs. We also focus on performance. Was the investment worthwhile? What are the lessons we can pick and what needs to be improved going forward? And finally, we also look at good practice. What I'm going to go through this afternoon, Kenyan time, is an output that we have developed and that falls under the people pillar. So here we're just looking at the community being served by this project done by Fusion. And this data was analyzed by CAHF and Real. Getting right into it, the image you could see, slide before, is Ubuntu. This is a Githurai project. The first picture on the left is the front part of it, and the second picture on the right, that's the back part of the project. Next slide, thank you. So in 2021, we worked with FSD Kenya and Real and CAHF to analyze the tenants or the households within the projects undertaken by Fusion Capital and KKL, that's Kwangukako. They mainly focus on the low to middle income residential rental market. And for this specific presentation, we'll focus on what we gathered from the tenants from Fusion. And out of the tenants that they have or the households that they serve, we were able to survey 72 respondents. And I understand that this is a very limited sample. We can't say that the findings from this really generalize the entire profile of the low-income households, but it gives us an idea or an indication of the types of tenants that that Fusion is able to reach and serve. The units we were looking at rent between 7,000 Kenya shillings and 12,000 Kenya shillings per month, depending on the size. So they vary from a bed-sitter to a one-bedroom or a two-bedroom. Next. And looking at the demographics, so we look at the demographics, we'll touch on the employment and income levels. We'll also look into expenditure and then the satisfaction check. And just to mention, this analysis is already available on the CAHF website. I'll put a link in the chat if you would like to just go look through it. As what I'll go through is only 4 aspects of it. There are others covered. We looked at utilities, we looked at sanitation, etc. So if you'd like to get that analysis in detail, I'll put the link in the chat immediately after this and you can just have a look at it. So just to go through the demographics first, most of the respondents were male at 54%, not so much of a difference, 54% against a 46% female. And for the lead tenants within these housing units, they're aged mainly between 21 and 30, which indicates it's a pretty young population that lives within these apartments. This graph that you see on your right side just shows an indication of the household size, and the bars in blue are the household size of these tenants in their previous house, so not the Fusion house. And then the orange bar shows the household size in the current Fusion apartment. And as you can see, most of the people are living a single person or people within their unit, so pretty small households. So there's that shift, but as you can see, most of them, there's an increase from the single people living in the previous units to those moving into Fusion's estate, where 50% are just living as a single person within that household. Then looking at the level of education, A good percentage of these have completed university, and some have an university education, so they're probably just ongoing, or they've not completed, or they've been there. So it's pretty well-educated population. In terms of employment, income, and expenditure, so in terms of employment status, 44%, close to 50%, are in the informal sector, which is really not a very shocking status. As we know, more than 70% of the Kenyans are working within the informal sector. So this just really shows the same thing. In terms of income, so this is the income of the main income earner within these households. And the majority of them were earning between 20,000 Kenya shillings and 30,000 Kenya shillings per month. As you can tell, there's a baseline survey and there's a follow-up survey. The survey was quite a process, so it wasn't done once. That's why we have those two surveys, but not much of a difference. In terms of expenditure, the pie chart that you can see there, the navy blue part shows that 34% of the households were spending their income, or they're using 34% of the income was going to rent, which is quite significant given the statistics that we've had previously. The World Bank some couple of years ago said people spend 30%, and that statistic has been questioned over and over again. And as you go lower in the market, you notice that people who have a smaller income spend really small percentages of that income on rent or on housing. And that's because there are so many other competing needs. This is slightly higher at 34%, and that does not even include the utilities, showing that there's still people willing to spend a little more on housing for better housing. And just to look at the bar graph on the right, just still the same on expenditure, you'll notice that rent takes up the highest amount again, followed by food, education, and transport. These are just the values in Kenya shillings per month. Yeah, that one. So this graph just tried to show the various people and their income, the specific income, and trying to split that and how they spend it. You'll notice the rent is a navy blue, quite consistent since we're looking at units within the same building, so 7,000 to 10,000, so just within the same. But if you look at other items on the list, you'll notice that health and food are quite consistent. The size of the bar is quite consistent across board. But you'll notice that for people with a very small income, then some barely spend anything on education, which is quite interesting to see. So having looked at that, then we also looked into satisfaction. And the main idea of this part of the survey was to identify, has the fusion apartments really improved the people's lives in any way? Is there an indication of access to better and having a better quality life? So we looked at one, people's satisfaction when it comes to the location, in relation to their workplaces and their jobs. And as you can tell, so the current home, which is a fusion home, is the bar in orange. 70% agree that they're better. They're better in terms of being positioned in relation to their workplaces and the jobs. The next graph shows positioning in relation to schools, clinics, and local markets. Again, there's a significant improvement from 65% who are happy in their previous unit to around 75% being happy with their current homes. And then the graph that's figure 11, this is on quality of housing. Again, a very significant shift to people having appreciated the better quality offered by Fusion compared to their previous home. In this case, we really can't tell their previous home. We didn't ask for too much details on that, but the previous home could have been elsewhere, could be in a different neighborhood, could just be within the same neighborhood, and they just moved to the Fusion apartments. And then in terms of the number of rooms, or just adequacy or the adequate space for them to hold their household, depending on the size, Again, there's an indication that their current home offers that better than the previous home. And finally, just on the overall quality of life, how tenants felt about it. So they've significantly ranked their current home as offering them better quality of life, which shows that while there's a slight increase in the rent prices, as I'd mentioned before, they're spending around an average of 34% of the rent of their income on rent. The quality of life has improved, which could somewhat justify why people would want to spend more, slightly more, just for better quality, and really shows that when we're able to offer better in the market, people are able to appreciate, and that's really results into satisfaction on overall. The last slide is just a summary of the findings and just exactly what I've just mentioned. Yeah.
Maybe I'll
just now.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I'll just jump in and comment as well. You know, it looks like Fusion did this survey because it does kind of summarize some of the points we were aiming to do. But like, thank you so much, Beatrice and team, for doing it. You never get data in this market. You never get good data feedback. But having direct feedback from our tenants has been invaluable because it's proved that we are on the right track as far as people have a better quality of life at roughly the same price. Our assumptions on percentage of cost have been backed up by the surveys, you know, which were independently done. So it's been incredible for us. And you know, if I could wish one thing on our market, it would be for developers to get this kind of data, this kind of feedback, which they can then build on. Because we will now that we're ready to kind of relaunch Ubuntu, we will use this data to show that some of the things, even though our building quality, we'll be honest, in our pilots are not as good as they will be with the future blocks, it still shows the value you get from caring about the tenants, putting extra money into the maintenance, etc., while trying to keep the rents at the same level. So yeah, just want to say thank you, and it's just been invaluable getting this feedback.
Okay, so now I'm really, really happy. We've got 20 whole minutes for questions. There are lots of questions in the chat box. And instead of me going through them, I think it would be easier if, James, most of them address you. I wonder if you could pull up the questions and just start answering them. And then there are 2 hands up as well. We could come to those hands if it's not been answered in the questions, because I think the hand up is also, someone has also put a question. So James, is that possible?
Yeah, great. Do we think it's smarter to go from the most recent question backwards, or I'd say yes in case I answered them. But I'll be reading them in real time, so apologies, team, if I need a bit of thinking time. So I'll start at the bottom.
I'd actually start at the top, James, so that if more come, you can keep going.
Okay, that's a good point. So if not covered later, what are the experience of, So the first question, Thomas Stewart, if not covered later, what is the experience of number of people who occupy the respective units, or is it restricted? So we have stopped 7 or 8 people occupying these units, and that's purely from a life and fire safety point of view. So yes, we monitor that directly at the unit level. And that's just because there are regulations on how much space a person should be living in, and we need to try and stay on the right side of those regulations. Henry's question on zoning and regulatory hurdles, I think I answered a bit later on in the presentation. We've never had problems with zoning. Like, it's something that we're normally pretty good at. I think in this case, we just went in for our first approval looking like a big international firm, and it may have, caused us to be treated with extra caution. We do think now that there's enough of a narrative with the government to get the approvals we need based on common sense and the good we're doing for these areas. But yeah, we had big problems. At the start, we had big problems on project 4, and that really did kind of derail. in a bit. And I think Antje is going to add to that as well.
Yeah, so there isn't, this area is actually not under Nairobi, so it's a county outside Nairobi, and we could be not being so polite that it's not written down fully, the zoning. But what we find recently is that everybody's now building 8 floors, and why we of course had the ground plus 4, as I explained, which was also similar on the previous one, was that is the level where you don't need a lift. So we would actually be lower than what density people are building at the moment, which is of course not, that is not regulated, but there isn't a clear zoning. It's more like a negotiation.
Yeah, good point. And that's what it felt like. It did feel like we were negotiating, and we ended up getting bit push and pull. Like I say, one road suddenly was fine and we didn't need a road reserve, but we did on another one. So it felt like we were negotiating something. Yeah. Thomas Stewart's question on the municipal parking requirements and were there any concessions? At the time, I don't think there were, but we know at the moment, one of the buildings we're looking at, there will be parking requirements. We haven't got our head around it yet, but yes, it's something we are having to think about. But the reality is parking destroys increased cost because it's a low yield way of using space. It's very unlikely we can make parking work in these high density areas. Even if we have to have a certain level of provision, we'd have to figure out how to do that. But it could impact our cost. And as you know, everything for us is cost.
No, and maybe just to add, if you have mostly studios, we can assume that people are not really having a car and that in those income brackets. So there's, again, room for negotiation. And what we find on other projects is that, once you have family units, then that's a requirement, the parking.
And to put this in perspective, our block in Ubuntu has space for 1 car and it's rented half the time. So like these guys, our tenants are not driving to and from work. It's why they're choosing. One of the things we didn't talk about was which really guided our vision at the start was that, by giving people good accommodation near to where they work, you actually take away a huge portion of their cost. I mean, if there's no point someone living in a great apartment and spending 10,000 shillings to live there and then spending 200 shillings a day commuting, if you can live somewhere for 12,000 shillings and spend 50 shillings a day commuting. Like it's why we think we need to improve these high density areas as opposed to building new cities, etc. for low income. Good. Please keep jumping in as I go through these questions. I'm not the best reader, so I probably might be reading some of them wrong. Another from Thomas Stewart. So any negative perceptions or stigmas attached to the multi-story accommodation and lack of external space, gardens for each unit? So I think unequivocally no, because the space we are working in and the space you're trying to work in, a garden is not an option unless they want to live 45 to 50 minutes further out of Nairobi. So what we are trying to do is provide, really our dream here would be to have an alternative to an informal settlement, which is the highest density low rise you can do, and giving someone an alternative to that. Having said that, we loved, everyone at Fusion is obsessed with greenery. And we did, one of the big things which we pushed into our brief was to have some kind of green space. So as Antje mentioned earlier, even just having those 2 light wells with 2 trees and a patch of grass, we really hoped, we didn't have that in the pilots, by the way. We thought that would make a huge difference. And the roof being not just drying, but also having some kind of gardening area. We really hope that would make a difference. And it's one of the things we haven't been able to test with the pilots that we're looking forward to testing with the first model block. The next one from Thomas is, I think, is just a compliment to you, Antje. The blank walls, very clever solution. They have not come across it before, which is great. Another one from Thomas on if it's achieved without any subsidies. I think we commented on that a bit. Our investors at Fusion were willing to take a lower equity return than we would get from our normal projects to do this, because we do think it is a solution that the market needs, and changing the quality of construction and the quality of buildings in these areas is something we are passionate about. But we are commercial developers. So in order to make this work, we need subsidized financing. And we are willing, because of our structure, to take subsidized debt. And I think that's why this was attractive to people, was that subsidized debt is more palatable than subsidized equity or gifted equity. And that's what we try to make work in our strategy. So we are hopefully going to talk to a few more debt providers and make the structure work. But yeah, it requires subsidized funding until we get to absolute scale. When we get to absolute scale, we think we can do this without subsidized funding, but let's see.
I think the next question is already going a bit in that direction. So with the EDGE compliance, I mean, those of you who are aware of EDGE, it was actually set up by IFC, and just exactly so that there is more transparency on what green measures are putting into their projects, because they are providing green finance. No? So it was exactly for projects like this, where you can't have a huge design team and you need to kind of comply with their ESG criteria on very basic measures.
Yeah, and to add to that, every DFI we spoke to required some kind of green aspect, which is a great step forward for the market. And even the two we came very close to drawing down from, both of them were impressed and happy that we managed to make EDGE work. And they were very keen that and what they really liked is we tried to come up with clever ways of doing it, as opposed to just, as I say, throwing money at the problem. And that's what kind of our architects did. Is there anything else in there? Are our designs uniform? They're uniform in the layout and that modular design we discussed. We never got to the point of discussing the changes in how we would change the way we build based on kind of resource availability, but I'm sure that's something which over the life of Ubuntu would need to be addressed, would probably have to be addressed. But what we aimed for is what is just the cheapest way of building these things. And what we came to through a lot of analysis, and by FBW and their team, they did a whole study on it, was that for now, the cheapest way of building is the local methods. It's the block, the concrete slabs, and that's what we ended up going for. At some point, someone will fix the aerated concrete block problem and it will become cheaper for us because of construction and transport and stuff. But at the moment it wasn't. And we didn't set ourselves to try and fix that problem. We wanted to just deliver the lowest cost unit possible. And so we just focused on that. Something above there. Oh,
in the same question.
Oh, they've all just disappeared. All the questions have just disappeared. Oh, I see, because they're going as answered. Right, let me go back. Okay. So our model was to just buy the land. And I think it's going to be covered in questions later, but it's a very strange thing. You know, as an international developer, we think a land a third, we think a third, a land a third, construction a third, a profit a third. It's just not what happens here. In these high density areas, I think for us, it was closer to, 20% land, 60% construction. So what we ended up doing was not worrying about the land, because the land was such a small portion. The margin on the land was small. Really, the construction was the thing we had to focus on. And Fusion is good at buying land. People know we're buying. We do get distressed, or people who need money quickly come to us. We know how to due diligence land in a way that means we don't get caught out there. So we actually bought our land in both these, in all three parcels of land we bought post-pilot. So I think we own about 5 pieces of land now. But the 3 we bought that we were going to build on, we bought them all at a great price, and we've got market appreciation on them over the last few years. So yeah, land was kind of not the biggest factor for us. It was all about cost and building. How do we do the developments? In the future, we will do, once we've proven the concept and we're confident we can give landowners return, we might do joint ventures. For now, we are looking to just purchase the land and build it, which is what we did for we purchased and built on some, repositioned some for the pilots. But yeah, at the moment, we need to be able to manage the whole chain. We need to be completely in charge, and to be completely in control, we, for now, are aiming to be the sole developer and the landowner within the vehicle and the structure. Okay, back to open questions. Thomas Stewart. So our experience is that the building is the easy part. The long-term management is the challenge. You're 100% correct. And Thomas, let's discuss this afterwards. But yeah, we as I said in the I think I may have answered this a bit during the presentation, but we set up Fusion Estates Management, which is now Fusion Capital Management, to do this, to figure out how to do this. And actually, we came up with a model that works really economically. You know, I think our running costs are significantly below 10%. And we set that structure up, and we spent a lot of time thinking about it, and we've proven it with our current with our 3 buildings. Other people have come to us to do that for their buildings, but the margins are incredibly thin, and it works for us as part of a wider strategy, but it doesn't work as far as just managing on behalf of other people. We've really tried, and actually, you know, FSD and CAHF have given us projects for this, and we've done the analysis and realized that we can't afford to spend management time, no matter how good the structure is, doing that. But yes, we found that, you know, the management is the tough bit, collecting rents, etc. But again, good product, good community, rents are collected. I think our lag, I mean, compared to our grade A guys, our lag on low income is incredibly low. I think it's 15 days, maybe, you know, the median lag is like 10 days. So there is a lag, of course, on payments. Very few people are paying up front, but it's not significant. It's nothing like our commercial tenants, where I'd say the median lag on a quarterly rental check is like 40 days. Great. A question from Robert Hornsby. Having heard the story of the negotiations with DFIs, it's withdrawing a question about Edge. When we talked to Edge Consultants, it was not clear. When we talked to Edge Consultants, it was not clear to us that the investments in the process of Edge certification, I'm not talking about the investments in design, like removing tiles, doing concrete floors, would return much in the way of unlocking capital. Interesting. So, as I said before, we found that we needed it to get the capital, but they were more impressed by our clever ideas and how not to spend money on it than just spending money on it. I'll be completely honest, when we started this, Edge was not on our list of things we were going, being green was not on our list of things we were going to do, because I lived in a world where I thought, as soon as you green something at the moment, you spend money. It was only when FBW explained you didn't need to spend money to get the green accreditation, you just have to be cleverer, that we actually put it onto our list. For us, it was always safety, and now it's safety, green. Great, hopefully that's answered that question, or it's been answered in the discussions. On to the next one from Enrito Reinhardt. Not a question, fantastic. We will ask CETA's team to take note of that. Question from Sam Okello. Have you considered venturing into other areas such as Kisumu, Machakos, Narok, Eldoret, where the cost of land is much lower, while the demand levels are fairly significant? This could probably help make the units more affordable. So yes, we have a list of places we want to build these blocks, and it's everywhere. As I said, we did a pilot in Nakuru, which was more of a repositioning, but it did prove that the demand for rentals was there. Everywhere you've named is on our list, but what we're trying to do first is stage 1 pilot, stage 2 was proof of concept. That was 10 blocks in high density Nairobi areas within 20 kilometers of the CBD. That was phase 2. So we're focused there. We will still be focused there. when we kind of bring Ubuntu back to the market. But yeah, we will. The idea here is that if the block worked, like we've seen with Kwetu have been incredible. Kwetu's pop up everywhere because they've proved the concept. So we would want to prove the concept and then replicate in all parts of Kenya. We've also been approached by the Rwandan government a couple of times to do it in Rwanda because we know Rwanda very well and we like developing there. So yeah, so we will expand it, but we have to prove the concept first. To prove the concept, we need about $5 million of cash. So that's basically where we are. Ruth Mooley, question from Ruth Mooley. There's one before. Yeah. What Edge version is this?
So I think it was version 2.1, but don't quote me. It's a few years. But of course, it's now on version 3.1. So cost per square meter, I think James can talk to about, and 5 floors. Yes, we have ground plus 4, so that is 5 floors. Thank you.
I actually don't have the numbers for cost per square meter on top of my head. I want to say,
I think when we did the analysis, it was about 35,000 per square meter construction cost. We don't have the full cost with the land and all that at the top of my head. But that's why we're very, very keen to try to raise small financing for construction of such pilots in infill areas, just to try to really get the real cost, because it's one thing to do a BQ and it's another thing to get the cost from a project. And also the cost can vary really greatly depending on how you deliver the buildings. Are you going to do the labor contract and buy your materials? Are you going to, get a full contract and maybe that way keep your risk down? And so again, it's still a very desktop number till we build it, but that was the benchmark for construction. When we circulate the presentation, we'll try to put in a figure on that. Thanks for that. And if I could also take Ruth's question about how this varies from Boma Yangu. In our perspective, Boma Yangu, if you look at the very high-rise buildings in Kibera and Mukuru, they're really, really amazing parcels of land, very large parcels, and right in the heart of informal settlements. So they're going up very high, which they should. It makes sense to have a lift in such areas, and the land is being contributed by government, and they're very well master planned. So each block has a lot of space between other blocks, etc. This is really looking at an infill solution, and there is no subsidy here unless we can find some form of blended finance, to help with the construction. And the idea that Fusion is really trying to unlock is, can we make rental residential an asset class that local investors like pension funds and REITs, who are all looking for income streams, can actually access? Because they will prove that these rental streams are stable. They'll prove that there's a certainty for these rental streams. And we think from some of the work we're doing, that the yields can, the gross yields can be between 8 to 12%. The net yields, I think one question, James, is what is the OPEX you're facing? Is it 10% or more? You can come in that. But, if we can get yields of around 8% net or even 10% net, that institutional investors can have certainty and they don't have the risk and they have asset management, so they're not getting involved in risks with tenants who are not paying, etc. At the same time, providing good housing, we think that will really unlock financing for this asset class, and it's really, really necessary. But the reason we need subsidy for the first pilot is, unfortunately, the interest rates prevailing in Kenya are very high, because there's so much borrowing happening at a government level. So just the interest on our bonds, which should be risk-free, are so high. And asset classes like this can't compete with those returns and be affordable. And so that's why we're really looking to pull partners together. That's why we were grateful to Fusion and FBW for sharing, because it's only trying to share how difficult a journey is, that we may entice some patient capital, that it's not from lack of trying this hasn't come up. They really are barriers to delivering. And I know we're out of time, so I was just trying to rush it, but I don't know if there's anything else. So Ashok has asked, what is the ROI you expect? James, I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, I mean, look, we were trying to build to 10. I think our pilots are at 9, between 9 and 9.5. No, it's not that it massively goes up with scale. What we think in is it much better in sale or scale? I'm gonna guess scale and say no, it doesn't massively increase with scale, other than our kind of cost of management goes down. But what scale does provide is it provides a massively de-risked. Effectively, this is just a rental product. It's a bunch of malls, right? Or it's a bunch of apartments. So really, what scale gives is it gives a lower risk tranche which we can sell, as Sita said, hopefully at some point to a pension fund or a local REIT. Yeah, and then
sorry, James, there is so many developers who are building for sale, SALE.
Sorry.
But what we've researched is most of the sales go to investors, and then the investors become micro landlords, and they're doing well. And that's one segment of the market, and it's good. It's providing good housing. But is there a way to do it where you're creating a single landlord for an asset so that the efficiencies and management can be done? And then so you can develop products that are suitable for capital markets, you can launch REITs. That's where we really appreciated Fusion's vision of managing the units and trying to build a portfolio that could be interesting to institutional capital and really local capital. So I wanted to answer that as well about sale, because sale does potentially give you more profit because you're getting your money out quickly, but then the buyers, as we've observed, are really single landlords rather than buying to live in most of these developments.
I'll actually add to that. I mean, the whole point here for us was, or every investor we spoke to who was going to give us some kind of subsidized capital was like, well, how are you going to stop the rents just going up? And the answer was, we will own all these buildings. We will have fixed rents that escalate based on inflation, not based on the change in the market. So we wanted to, and actually with us, as long as we can make our economics work, that works for us in the long run, because rents do shoot up quickly, and we would be able to keep our rents low while keeping the same margin. And as Sita said, the only way we could figure out to build and sell would be to build and sell to tenant the buildings, then sell to investors like you would, maybe one of those hotels which people break down. But as soon as someone else owns it, they will chase rent, because we're investors. That's what we do. So the only way to keep rents at the levels which our investors wanted them to be was to manage the whole process from start to finish.
So I don't think there are any other, I don't think there are any other costs. Maybe you can speak to your operational costs, please, like what you found, if you know that.
Yeah, I mean, we invested heavily in a system, which was partially funded by, I think I can say FSD helped us with that. And the system has made our running costs extremely low. So I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I know we're sub 10%. I think we're closer to 7%. And that includes general maintenance. So we've the Ubuntu community's structure has worked for that. We think it's what's led to a lower cost, because when I look at my own investment units, I always think of a 10% cost, and we're below than that in low income housing. So it is it's working. But again, we had to build that whole infrastructure in house. And being completely honest, at the moment, it's a cost center. So maybe that 7% is subsidized at some level by Fusion and Fusion Group. But again, that's why scale. That's why we needed scale. We need scale to make the next phase of this work.
Yeah, and to touch on that, I think, FSD and Fusion had a very small grant from 2021 where we were just trying to support Fusion with the vision of the 50 Ubuntu blocks. We're now in 2025. I am going to, bring this webinar to a close. You can see what it, how much information practitioners can share with us. It's very different from non-practitioners sharing information and trying to solve a problem. So we're really, really grateful that we have actual market players. But you can see the journey's been very difficult. So when open access was launched, I think we said it's not access to the building plan that's going to make you a housing developer. It's really your reputation to raise finance, it's your resilience, it's your ability to manage relationships, get approvals, manage all the tenancy or sale issues, the legal issues. It's a long-term game. And that really is the heart of open access. Let's reduce the barriers to the basic information, obviously not stage 3 design plans, but basic information for people to do high-level feasibility to know whether the project is a go, no-go, at least at the start. And I'll request Beatrice to please put in links to 2 very interesting webinars we've had in March and April that are building on the same concept. But it's really to say, building, getting approvals, one of the key things that FSD and partners have said in engagement with government is if there's one policy change, it could be to make approvals easier, have a one-stop shop for approvals, have more of an even playing field to know what the approvals should be in each location, and to really even give standardized approvals for pre-approved plans. So you kind of agree with the typology and you don't need to go back for the typology, just for the final details on each plot. And then picking up on the parking question, I think that's something that's very close to any affordable housing practitioner. If you want to create affordable housing, you should not be talking about a car. I don't know why our policymakers are not able to create that. And I believe they are, because when you walk around in neighborhoods like Idirai Kawangware, there's very limited parking. People commute by walking, people commute by public transport. And so this obsession with the car, and it's not coming out as strongly in the building code as we'd like, that where we're creating housing of less than this much in this location, please don't put any requirements for parking, because what we feel happens is the parking becomes a negotiating entry, as opposed to saying you don't need it, so let's not negotiate. And I think that also speaks a lot to green standards. We would like to champion with partners what is green for truly affordable housing, where people are paying $7,000 per month in rent, even $12,000. There's so much that's not captured that is so green. The fact that the unit sizes are small, the fact that the materials used are so small, so limited, so the embodied carbon is small. The fact that people walk to work or use public transport, so there isn't a space for parking. So the occupant is green in their lifestyle. And the fact that the Kenyan grid is very green, like we have really high renewable energy inputs into our grid. We don't get credit for that as a very low income affordable housing developer. And that's where we'd like to really push the discussions, the policy, and that's where we need the collaboration we're seeing with partners. So I think on that note, I'd like to really thank again Fusion for trusting this process and sharing what you've shared, to FBW for the great, really detailing all the innovation and thought you put into design, to CAHF for the research work, and to everyone who's attended this and continues to challenge the discussion, so we can now start building some housing and share the journey when we build, because we can only learn from each other and iteratively make it cheaper. So I'll just give it to the participants if they want to say one last thing, and then we'll close off.
Nothing from me, just thank you. Thank you for setting this up. Thanks for getting everyone in, and thanks for listening. It's great to talk about something you know about.
Yeah, thank you as well. From my side, I see there's discussion, I was thinking after the last webinar, we will discuss sort of where we are similar. So I still want to have those discussions. with the team from the last webinar on the technical side. And yeah, I of course learned a lot on the financial one, so thank you very much.
Thanks so much. All the links are in the chat, but in case you missed them, please do drop an email to me at beatrice@housingfinanceafrica.org, and I'll be happy to share them with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Till the
Thanks,
next
everyone.
one.